Emily, I think I want an open marriage. Those were the first words my husband said as he sat down across from me at our kitchen table that night. No preamble, no hesitation. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between us, and my hand froze midway to my glass of water. Then he smiled that new, measured smile that never quite reached his eyes anymore and said softly, "You look shocked." I was, not because the idea of infidelity hadn't crossed my mind, but because it had never belonged to him. Daniel Ward. 40 years old, dependable. Grounded the man who once said his idea of rebellion was skipping dessert. My name is Emily Ward, 35 project manager by day, overthinker by night. For 7 years, I built my marriage with precision, a quiet home stable, income shared dreams. We'd been saving for our first house, the one with the maple tree and the wide porch we'd talk about every Sunday morning. But lately, I'd started to feel like I was building a dream alone. I set my glass down slowly. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" He leaned back, fingers laced behind his head, a posture I'd never seen on him before. Confident, almost performative. "I've been doing a lot of work on myself lately. Vanessa says people change when they stop pretending." There it was again. That name. Vanessa. His life coach, though, from the way he said it, you'd think she was a prophet. I tried to keep my voice even. "Work on yourself, like therapy." "Not therapy," he said, quickly shaking his head. "More like awakening. She runs these workshops, Awaken the Masculine Within. It's about rejecting old conditioning, breaking free from expectations." Expectations. I knew which ones he meant. The marriage, the bills, me. I folded my hands, pretending calm. "And how does opening our marriage fit into this awakening?" He sighed like a teacher disappointed in a slow student. "It's about honesty, Emily, authenticity. We both deserve the chance to explore what we've been denying ourselves. Don't you ever wonder who you could be if you weren't someone's wife?" I wanted to laugh, but the sound died in my throat. Instead, I stared at him, at the man I'd loved since my 20s, who once stayed up all night beside me when my mother was in the hospital, who used to bring me coffee just the way I liked it without asking. Now he spoke like a stranger quoting someone else's beliefs. "I don't feel trapped, Daniel," I said quietly. "But if you do, you should at least be honest about why." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That was the thing about Daniel lately. He was full of rehearsed speeches, but empty when confronted with reality. When he finally spoke, his voice softened. "I love you, Emily. I do. But I'm not in love with you anymore." That sentence landed like a knife sliding between ribs, slow, precise, final. I couldn't find my voice. I just nodded because anything I said might have turned into begging, and I refused to beg for someone who'd already left in spirit. Daniel kept talking about how Vanessa helped him reconnect with his inner self, how monogamy was a construct, how love could be expanded. Every word felt like watching a house I built brick by brick catch fire, while the person inside smiled and said it was transformation. At some point I whispered, "Are you seeing her?" He looked offended. "This isn't about Vanessa, it's about me." But his eyes darted away just long enough for me to know the truth. I stood needing distance. "Then you should take all the space you need, Daniel." He frowned. "You're misunderstanding. I'm not ending things. I just want us both to be free." "Free?" The word echoed in the kitchen, sharp and cruel. Without another word, I walked to the bedroom and opened the closet. The familiar scent of cedar hit me, the scent of a shared life. I pulled out a suitcase, the one we'd used on our honeymoon to Santorini. Behind me, his footsteps followed. "Emily, don't do this. You're being reactive." I turned, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You just told me you're not in love with me and you want to sleep with other people. I think I'm reacting appropriately." His jaw tightened. "You're twisting my words." "No, Daniel," I said softly. "I'm finally hearing them." I packed silently my laptop, my clothes, my toothbrush, while he stood in the doorway talking about evolution and freedom like those words could replace loyalty. When I zipped the suitcase, the sound was deafening. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Somewhere that doesn't make me question my worth every time I walk in the door." He reached out, but I stepped back. "You wanted space, Daniel. You have it now." And with that, I left. Outside, the air was cold and biting. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the dark windows of the home that wasn't mine anymore. Part of me waited for him to come out to chase me to say he'd made a mistake. But the door never opened. Instead, my phone buzzed, a message from him. "I know this is hard, but this is the right thing for both of us. You'll understand one day." I looked at the words until they blurred. Then I turned off my phone, started the engine, and drove into the night. No destination, just distance. As the highway lights streaked past my windshield, one thought kept repeating in my mind like a broken prayer. He doesn't love you anymore. He just doesn't know how to admit it without sounding enlightened. And somewhere between one city and the next, I stopped crying. Because for the first time in months, I realized something Daniel hadn't. Freedom isn't walking away, it's letting go. The next morning, Daniel called me, not to apologize, not to ask where I'd gone, just to say, I hope you're calmer now. I remember staring at my phone, my coffee turning cold beside me in the tiny hotel room I'd checked into the night before. He spoke like I was the one who'd lost control, like walking away from a man who just destroyed 7 years of marriage was a tantrum, not survival. I'm calm, I said flatly. I'm also done. He sighed on the other end. Emily, don't be dramatic. We can talk through this. Maybe we just need boundaries. Boundaries, I echoed. You mean the kind that let you explore other women while I sit at home pretending it's spiritual growth? There was a pause. Then his tone shifted, that slow, patronizing calm that used to make me second-guess myself. It's not about other women. It's about expansion. We've been living small. Vanessa says, Don't. My voice cracked sharper than I expected. Don't bring her name into our marriage. He didn't reply, and for a moment I thought I heard the faint sound of waves in the background. Then it clicked. He was calling from the retreat center, the one Vanessa ran, the one I'd helped him fund when he said it was a business investment. I hung up without saying goodbye. That was the last conversation we had before I filed for divorce. The following days blurred into a strange rhythm. Emails to lawyers, calls to the bank, the quiet panic of moving out of a life you'd thought was permanent. I spent the first night in my new apartment, sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes and silence. It wasn't grief that filled the air, it was disbelief. That a man could stand beside you for 7 years, say I love you 1,000 times, and still wake up one morning, convinced that freedom meant walking away from you. Every object I unpacked told a story. The chipped mug he'd bought me on our first anniversary. The framed photo of us in Italy, his arm around me, eyes crinkled in sunlight. The house key I'd once thought we'd use for our forever home. I held that key for a long time, then dropped it into the trash. A week later, I received a long email from Daniel. The subject line read, Please read before you make a mistake. Emily. I know you're hurt, but this doesn't have to mean the end. I still care about you deeply. I think you're just reacting out of fear. Vanessa says fear is the ego trying to hold on to control. Let's take a break, not a divorce. Please don't do anything irreversible. I stared at the words until the letters seemed to float. Even now, he couldn't own what he'd done. He had to filter it through Vanessa's borrowed wisdom. It wasn't love he was offering, it was condescension disguised as compassion. I replied with a single sentence. I already did something irreversible, Daniel. I stopped loving a man who uses excuses to lie. Then I hit send and closed the laptop. For weeks, he kept reaching out calls, voice messages, handwritten letters left at the old apartment. His tone changed with every attempt. At first, calm. We're just figuring out who we are. This can make us stronger. Then guilt-ridden. We've been through too much to throw it away. Then angry. You're making me the villain when all I did was be honest. And finally desperate. Please, Emily, don't do this. Vanessa's retreat is almost ready to launch. Once I'm settled, things will make sense again. That last one almost made me laugh. He truly believed things would make sense once his fantasy life stabilized, as if emotional betrayal could be managed like a spreadsheet. But what he didn't realize was that I was already rebuilding. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Caroline, handled the paperwork efficiently. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses during our first meeting and said, Most clients cry at least once. You haven't yet. I smiled weakly. Maybe I cried all my tears before I got here. Caroline nodded. Good. Then let's get you free on paper too. Within 2 weeks, the documents were ready. I sent them to Daniel through certified mail, a deliberate choice. I wanted him to sign his name beside his awakening. He didn't reply for 3 days. Then came the text. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. I typed back. You thought I'd wait for you to decide if I'm enough. I won't. I kept busy work, exercise, small rituals that filled the emptiness. There were still moments that hurt unexpectedly, hearing his favorite song in a cafe, passing couples who laugh the way we used to. But pain is strange. It comes in waves, and if you stand still long enough, it passes through you instead of drowning you. I started sleeping through the night again. I started liking the silence. And one morning, as sunlight streamed through my new kitchen window, I realized I hadn't thought about Daniel in 2 whole days. It was a small victory, but it felt like breathing after years underwater. Then, out of nowhere, a message arrived from a mutual friend, Megan. Her text was short, but loaded. I don't know if you've heard, but Daniel quit his job. Says he's going all in on Vanessa's retreat. Moved into her place full time. I just stared at my screen. There it was, confirmation of what I'd known all along. I felt no anger, only a hollow sort of pity. Daniel had traded stability for illusion, love for ego, a marriage for a movement he didn't even understand. And all I could think was, I hope the freedom he wanted keeps him warm at night. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my journal for the first time in months. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Sometimes the people who preach about finding themselves are just trying to escape who they've become." Underneath it, I added, "And sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for both of you." Then I closed the book, turned off my phone, and sat in silence, not lonely, not heartbroken, just free. When I left Daniel, I didn't pack for forever, I packed for survival. A week's worth of clothes, my laptop, and the stack of journals that had once held dreams for a future that no longer existed. At first, I kept telling myself this was temporary, that he'd wake up from his so-called awakening, realize what he'd thrown away, and call me home. But as the days stretched into weeks, I realized something deeper. It wasn't him who needed to wake up. It was me. I remember standing in line at the bank that Monday morning, closing our joint account. The teller looked up, polite but curious. "Are you sure you want to transfer the entire balance, Mrs. Ward?" "Mrs. Ward?" The name stung like a bruise pressed too hard. I nodded. "Yes, half to this new account under Emily Ward only." By that evening, the funds were mine. $47,000 I'd saved through endless nights of extra work, skipped vacations, and saying no to things I wanted so that we could have more later. Only there was no we anymore. That night, I sat in my small apartment surrounded by cardboard boxes and the smell of fresh paint, staring at the number on my bank app. It felt both empowering and hollow. Money couldn't fill the space where trust used to live. Still, it was something real, something I could control, unlike Daniel, unlike love. A few days later, Caroline called. "The divorce filing is in motion," she said. "Once he's served, the countdown starts." "Served?" I asked. "Yes. A process server will deliver the papers. You don't have to see him. You don't have to talk to him." Relief washed over me. I hadn't realized until that moment how much energy I'd wasted rehearsing what I'd say if I ever saw him again. Now I didn't have to. "Thank you," I whispered. Caroline paused. "You're handling this better than most." No anger. I thought for a long time before answering. "There's anger," I said quietly, "but it's buried under something stronger, disappointment." Daniel didn't take the news quietly. Within hours of being served at Vanessa's retreat, he called me 6 times. I didn't answer. Then came the messages. "Emily, we don't have to do this. I know I hurt you, but everything I'm doing is temporary. Vanessa's helping me find clarity. You'll see." Then hours later, "You're not even giving me a chance after everything we've been through." And finally, "I can't believe you'd humiliate me like this in front of everyone. You could have at least talked to me first." I read them all one by one, then deleted them. Not out of spite, but because I refused to let his confusion rewrite the narrative. He wanted freedom. I was just giving it to him. Weeks turned into months. I found a rhythm in my new life: quiet mornings, coffee by the window, the sound of my neighbor's dog barking as he left for work. I filled my days with projects, late-night runs, and dinners with friends who didn't ask about Daniel unless I brought him up first. But sometimes when the world went still, when the phone stopped buzzing and the city outside went dark, I'd catch myself replaying our life together. The first time he kissed me under the rain outside my old apartment. The way he used to hum absent-mindedly while making pancakes on Sundays. The night he proposed, hands trembling, eyes soft with certainty. I missed that version of him, the one who loved me, before he learned to talk about alignment and energetic freedom. But that version of him was gone, and the man who replaced him was someone I didn't recognize. 3 months after the divorce filing, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I let it ring, assuming it was another client. But then came a voicemail. "Emily, it's Megan. We haven't spoken in a while, but you should probably know. Daniel's in trouble." I played it again, heart pounding. Vanessa disappeared. The retreat's a mess. Investors pulled out. She took his savings, and maybe yours too, if he used that joint account before you closed it. He's not doing well. He's been sleeping at the studio. Please call me. For a long time, I just sat there. Not shocked, not vindicated, just still. Because I'd known this was coming, the moment he traded our life for her promises. I finally texted back. "Thanks, Megan. I hope he finds his footing. But I can't be part of that anymore." Her reply came minutes later. He's lost everything, Emily. I think he finally realizes what he did. I stared at those words for a long time. Once they would have filled me with a cruel sense of satisfaction, but now all I felt was tired. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, rain streaked down the glass in long, trembling lines. I thought about how love can change, how something once sacred can become a weight, how a promise can turn into a cage. Daniel said he wanted to find himself. And maybe he did. He found the part of himself that couldn't handle loyalty when life got quiet. I whispered his name once, not as a curse, not as a plea. Just as a memory I was finally ready to release. Then I took a slow breath, opened my laptop, and typed a message to Caroline. Let's finalize everything. I'm ready to move on. And I meant it, because somewhere between heartbreak and healing, I had rediscovered something I'd forgotten myself. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the news reached me. The kind of morning that used to belong to coffee laughter and Daniel humming some old tune while reading the paper. Now the only sound in my apartment was the low whir of my ceiling fan and the steady buzz of my phone against the table. It was Megan again. Emily, I really think you should hear this. I sighed and picked up. Megan, I told you. I know she cut in quickly. You don't want to talk about him, but this isn't gossip. It's bad. I leaned back, bracing myself. Go on. She hesitated, her voice trembling just slightly. Vanessa's retreat, it collapsed. Investors are demanding refunds. Apparently she used Daniel's name on some of the documents. He's being investigated. My stomach tightened. Investigated. For fraud, maybe. Or at least for financial misrepresentation. No one's sure yet. But Emily, she took everything. His savings, the donations, even the equipment leases were in his name. He's ruined. For a moment, the world went quiet. Ruined. That word hung in the air, heavy and final. Where is he now, I asked, even though I didn't really want to know. He's been crashing with different people. Vanessa left town 2 weeks ago. No one's seen her since. I closed my eyes. I'd imagined this scene before, though not out of spite, just inevitability. It was the ending written in invisible ink the day Daniel traded stability for a fantasy. Megan exhaled softly. He's too proud to call you, but I think he wants to. Then let him want, I said, my voice calm, detached. Wanting's the only thing he ever truly committed to. Later that night, I sat on my couch phone, still in hand, replaying Megan's words. For a fleeting moment, guilt pricked at me. Not for leaving him, I'd done what I had to, but for not feeling the kind of sorrow a wife should feel hearing her husband's life had fallen apart. But that's the thing, he wasn't my husband anymore. He was a man I used to love, who'd burned down everything we'd built. I thought back to the first time he'd mentioned Vanessa's retreat. It had sounded harmless then, a week-long mindfulness workshop. He'd said it was about reconnecting with purpose, about finding balance. But somewhere between the meditation mats and the spiritual jargon, she had found the one thing Daniel couldn't resist: validation. She made him feel extraordinary, special, something I and all my ordinary love and daily devotion could never compete with. That realization used to sting. Now it just made sense. The next day, I was in the middle of a team meeting when a number I didn't recognize flashed across my phone. I declined it. It rang again immediately. By the third time, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. I already knew who it was before I answered. Emily. His voice was soft, not the confident, certain tone I remembered, but something smaller, worn down. Daniel, I didn't think you'd pick up. I almost didn't. There was silence. I could hear him breathing, could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he always did when he didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell you I'm sorry, he finally said, for everything. Vanessa, the retreat, all of it. You were right, about everything. I closed my eyes. It's not about being right, Daniel. I lost everything, he said quietly. The house fund, the job, the savings. It's all gone. My breath caught. The house fund. Before you closed the joint account, I used some of it. For the retreat, he admitted. I thought it would grow the business. His voice broke. I thought it would make you proud of me. I leaned against the wall, the cool paint pressing against my back. There was a time when that confession would have crushed me. But now it only made me realize how deep his delusion had gone. You didn't need to make me proud, I said softly. You just needed to be honest. I know, he whispered, and now it's too late. We sat in silence, two ghosts tethered by the faint echo of a life we once shared. Then I said the words that had been sitting on my tongue for months. You wanted freedom, Daniel. You found it. But freedom without integrity isn't liberation, it's collapse. He didn't respond, just a quiet, broken exhale. Take care of yourself, I said. Then ended the call before he could answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up, made tea, and stood by the window, staring at the city lights. Somewhere out there, he was probably doing the same, staring at the same skyline, wondering how everything had slipped away. For years, I'd thought our love was unbreakable because it was built on endurance, shared dreams, shared sacrifices. But endurance without truth is just delay. The cracks had been there all along. I'd just called them compromise. And now the house fund we'd built together was gone. The house itself, the dream had never been real. But as strange as it sounds, I didn't feel robbed. Because the home I truly wanted wasn't made of bricks and savings, it was peace. And for the first time in years, I had it. The next morning, I went for a run before sunrise. The air was cold, the streets quiet, and for a brief, perfect moment, I felt weightless, unbound by what was or what could have been. At a red light, I paused, catching my reflection in a shop window. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same Emily who'd once begged Daniel to stay, who'd mistaken chaos for growth. She was stronger, steadier, and for the first time, free on her own terms. The phone buzzed again in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know who it was. I just kept running. A full year passed before I heard his voice again. By then, the divorce had been finalized, the papers sealed, and my life had quietly rearranged itself into something steady, something mine. I'd built routines, morning jogs, weekend farmers markets, evenings spent with friends who made me laugh without mentioning his name. Peace had become a habit. And then one night, in late spring, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Daniel. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over delete. But I didn't. I just set the phone down and let it ring again. Hours later, ignored, unanswered. Then came another message. I made a mess of everything. I thought I was searching for something higher, but I was just running from what was real. You. I didn't reply. He kept writing. Not every day, but often enough to remind me that regret ages slower than guilt. "You were always the one who believed in me, Emily. I didn't see it then. Vanessa's gone. She's in Bali or somewhere. She never cared. I think about you when I walk by the old cafe. You love their hazelnut latte. Do you still go there?" Sometimes I'd read the messages before bed, then turn my phone face down on the nightstand feeling nothing but distance. Because that was the cruelest truth of all. Not that I hated him, but that I didn't anymore. One afternoon, I got a call from Megan. Her tone was hesitant, the way people sound when they're not sure how much pain you've healed from. "Emily, Daniel's been asking around about you. He says he wants to apologize in person." I laughed softly. Apologize or be forgiven. She sighed. Both maybe. "I hope he finds what he's looking for," I said simply. "But it won't be me." Still, curiosity is a quiet poison. That night, I scrolled through his old social media out of habit. The man who once posted quotes about authentic living now shared pictures of sunsets, with vague captions like "learning from mistakes and starting again." His eyes looked tired, heavier, like he was carrying too many what-ifs. I closed the app and slept soundly for the first time in weeks. 2 months later, he showed up. I was leaving my office when I saw him standing in the lobby. Thinner, older, dressed in clothes that didn't quite fit. For a second, I didn't recognize him. "Emily." Hearing my name in his voice after all that time hit like a sudden wind. He stepped forward, tentative. "You look good." I nodded. "You don't." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Fair." We stood in silence, surrounded by the faint echo of heels and phones and other people's lives moving on. Finally, I asked, "What do you want, Daniel?" He swallowed hard. "To say I'm sorry. Really sorry. For everything. For not seeing what I had. For thinking that being free meant walking away from you." I said nothing. He continued, voice trembling now. "You were my anchor, and I mistook that for being held down. I thought I needed to fly, but I just fell." I looked at him, then really looked, and realized something that startled me. I didn't see my husband anymore. I saw a man who'd broken something sacred and was finally standing in the rubble, wondering why it still hurt. "You hurt me, Daniel," I said quietly. "But the worst part isn't that you left. It's that you made me doubt whether love meant anything at all." His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. "Do you think you could ever forgive me?" "I already did," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean return." He took a shaky breath. "Are you seeing someone?" I hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. "Yes. His name's Andrew. He's kind, steady, and he doesn't confuse chaos with passion." Daniel looked down, shoulders collapsing slightly. "Is it serious?" "It's honest," I said, and that was all that needed to be said. He followed me outside, the evening light stretching long shadows across the pavement. "Emily," he said softly, "I don't deserve another chance. but I wish you'd at least remember the good parts. We were happy once, weren't we? I turned to face him fully. We were. But happiness isn't the same as wholeness. You wanted to find yourself Daniel, and you found the part of you that didn't know how to stay. He opened his mouth to reply, but I was already walking toward my car. As I reached for the handle, he called out, "Do you ever think about us?" I paused just long enough to answer truthfully. "Sometimes," I said, "but only the way you think about a dream after you wake up. You remember the feeling, not the story." Then I got in the car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, small against the fading light, looking like a man who finally understood the cost of freedom. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote one final entry in the journal I'd started the week he left me. The ink bled a little as I wrote. Some people spend years chasing what they already had mistaken contentment for confinement. I spent 2 years learning that peace isn't what you find after love ends. It's what begins when you stop waiting for someone to come back. I closed the journal, set it on the shelf beside the others, and turned off the light. For the first time in years, the past didn't feel heavy anymore. It just was. I didn't cry after seeing Daniel that day. Not on the drive home, not later that night when the memories tried to creep in through the cracks of silence. I just felt clean. Like the ache that had lived under my ribs for years had finally loosened its grip and dissolved into something softer acceptance. That's the thing no one tells you about heartbreak. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's peace, and peace is quiet. A few weeks later, I stood on the porch of my new home, my home. A modest craftsman with sunlit windows, a garden of wild lavender, and walls painted the color of calm mornings. It wasn't the dream house Daniel and I had once planned, but it was real. It was mine. I had used what remained of our savings, my savings, to buy it. Every brick felt like proof that I had rebuilt from the ashes. Proof that I could stand on my own 2 feet, not in spite of what he did, but because of it. As I unpacked boxes, I found things that carried echoes of the past. A chipped coffee mug. The wedding photo I couldn't bring myself to throw away, the journal, where I'd once written, "I hope we never lose this." I smiled at that line, not with bitterness, but with something close to gratitude. Because we did lose it, and losing it made room for who I'd become. Sometimes friends still ask about him. They tiptoe around his name as if it's a fragile thing that might crack the air. "Do you ever think about Daniel?" one asked over dinner one night. I took a sip of wine and smiled faintly. "Not really. Not the way you think. He's more of a lesson now than a memory." They nodded, unsure what to say next. But I knew exactly what I meant. Daniel had been my mirror, showing me where I was, too soft, too patient, too willing to shrink myself for someone else's comfort. He'd taught me what love shouldn't cost. Months passed. Seasons turned. Life became filled with small joys that felt almost sacred. Morning jogs by the lake, fresh flowers on the kitchen table, Sunday breakfast with Andrew, the man who'd walked into my life with quiet steadiness and never once made me question my worth. With him, there were no grand gestures, no declarations about freedom or self-discovery, just kindness, honesty, presence. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sky fade into gold, he reached for my hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. Leaving him. I looked at him, this man who had no idea how close I'd once come to breaking, and smiled. "Regret? No," I said. "It's the best thing I ever did for myself." He nodded, squeezing my hand gently. And for a moment I thought of Daniel wherever he was and hoped he'd found his peace too. Not the kind that comes from chasing new beginnings, but the kind that comes when you finally stop running from who you are. A few months later, another text arrived from an unfamiliar number. I didn't need to open it to know. Still curiosity won. "I know you won't reply, but I want you to know I understand now what I lost. I hope someday you can forgive me. Daniel." I read it once, twice, then deleted it without hesitation. Not out of anger, but because that chapter no longer needed rereading. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my kitchen as I brewed coffee and watched the world outside wake up. The past felt distant, like an old dream I'd finally outgrown. I thought of that girl I used to be, the one who cried in a hotel room, clutching her suitcase and asking herself how everything had fallen apart. She had no idea that falling apart was how she would eventually fall into herself. And for that I was grateful. I took a slow breath, savoring the stillness, and whispered to no one in particular. Maybe to him, maybe to the woman I used to be. "You wanted freedom, Daniel. You got it, and so did I." I stepped out onto the porch, the morning light warm against my face. Birds chattered in the distance, and the air smelled like rain and new beginnings. For the first time in a long time, everything was exactly as it should be.